Hi, I'm Lori.
And I'm Kevin, and this is No Longer Ashamed.
We are survivors of childhood sexual abuse.
And we're here to share with you that if you're a survivor, you don't have to be alone.
Our logo is a salamander, and the reason is a fire salamander can survive a fire, and you have survived a fire.
We want to help you with your journey to healing and hope.
We are all survivors together, and we walk this journey together, and you are not alone.
By telling our stories, we are hoping that you will have the courage to share your stories as well and find your voice.
Because stories are so important, and for so long I know that I wouldn't tell my story, but when I finally shared my story, that's when I got my freedom.
And this is our journey and your journey to healing and hope. So come with us. I wanted to talk about the book that I heard about recently called Hope for Cynics by Jamil Zaki. And it really struck home because I heard about this book, and he's talking about how, well, one of the things he mentions is in 1972, half of Americans agreed that most people can be trusted. But by 2018, only a third of the people in America believe that most people can be trusted. And so we're becoming a more cynical society. And I think during elections, it becomes even worse. I think every 4 years it becomes worse. And
it's nothing like when we were kids where we voted, it was over, on with it. But, it's interesting because the name of that book is not a book I would have ever picked up had I not heard him on Hidden Brain, because I would have never pegged myself as a cynic. And so that was the big revelation for me, is that I actually am a cynic.
Yeah. And I felt the same way, because I think if I saw that book, I would not have thought, oh, I should look at that because I'm so cynical. But we don't recognize it all the time because we just assume that it's a normal thing to be cynical. But really, it's important to pay attention to how you feel. Do you trust people, or do you just find some people trustworthy? Do you think most people are greedy or selfish? Do you think that...
I think that's what opened my eyes, is if I thought I was cynical, I would say no. But when he put it in those words of, do you trust people?
Mm-hmm.
I thought, oh, not really. I mean, and plus for me being a woman, like I don't go to the store at night. If someone walks up to me at night when I'm going to a grocery store, I'm not going to trust them. But then even on a more basic level, do I trust people? And I think I might have ever said, oh, I have a hard time trusting people. But the way he talked about it, I went, oh my goodness, I don't.
Yeah, I realize. And what's so important about it is the way we feel about others affects how we treat others, and it affects how they treat us, because they're picking up on how we feel about them. It becomes obvious in the way we treat others. And so it affects our communication. It affects our connections with people. And if we're always or often skeptical, if we're feeling like, people are generally greedy, or they are untrustworthy, or they're dishonest often. And I think for me, it made me realize I have a cynical nature, especially during election times, but also even in general, especially if I think about how I feel about other people when I'm driving. I always think other drivers have their own interests and aren't being considerate of anyone else. And so they're intentionally being inconsiderate, is how I often feel.
That's very nice language.
Well, I don't always use nice language when I'm, and that's part of the thing is it affects us because we're creating this cynicism, and it spreads. It's not, how we always talk about self-healing is a form of community service. Well, being cynical is a community disservice, because we're spreading this feeling of skepticism, of cynicism. And,
I was thinking about when I really felt it, because it's one thing to be a certain way and not realize it, like for me to not realize, because I try to smile at people. I try to do the right thing, but it's not always because I actually like love all the people. It's like I'm trying to do the right thing and be kind, but it's not always heart. And so I remember when COVID hit and would go to the grocery store and people would look at me, like not me personally, but I would say, look at each other like you're trying to kill me. That's the feeling I got. And I hated going to the grocery store because if you accidentally stepped over that 6-foot line, you get, the evil eye. And of course, everyone's got a mask. So you don't know, maybe they're smiling with an evil eye. But I remember that feeling. And I think that is, I remember when I was at Esther's place and the Day Center for Homeless Women. And sometimes the ladies would say, I feel like I have "kick me" written on my forehead. And I said, you do, because you don't love yourself. And when we don't love ourselves, we don't love others. And since we started talking about this, Kevin, I just see this, how it just keeps, it's like this big cycle.
It spirals. It just keeps spiraling out. And it also, there is a way out of it. And this really ties into what we've been talking about, our inner maps and our fallback mode, our default mode. And if we automatically are cynical, we're always going to kind of be, but if we can start finding hope, and he talked about the difference between hope and optimism. And optimism is just kind of this, oh, la, 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 everything's great in spite of the situation. But hope is more being aware of a situation, but feeling like it can be better, that it can get better, that, you can have a reason to think that things will get better, not just thinking, la, 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 everything's great. No, recognizing that maybe not everything's great, but it can get better.
I love his example. He said, it's like if you're in a burning building and you go, oh, it's not that bad. Or you are in a burning building and you go, we're in a burning building, but we can find a way out. We can problem solve.
Yeah, we can find a way to put out or get out. Yeah. And he talks about hopeful skepticism. And the skepticism part sounds contradictory, but what you're actually skeptical is your own default assumptions. Being skeptical of thinking people are always dishonest or greedy or selfish or untrustworthy. So having a skepticism that that's necessarily true and looking for the good in people was how he said you counter this. He found out because he was trying to have a better attitude about people with his kids. And he was always griping and stuff. So he decided to have a better attitude by finding something that someone had done that was good every day. Someone being generous or helpful or finding the good in people. And he found that by looking for that every day, it started changing the way he looked at people. And he felt like people aren't necessarily selfish because he saw them doing these good things. And that's kind of the thing about being a cynic, is when you feel like people are greedy or selfish or dishonest, you see that and it perpetuates. That's what you look for and that's what you see. And when you see it, it reinforces it. And then you automatically think that everyone's that way when you're just seeing the negative.
Yeah. And if we're a survivor, we've been doing this for years. I remember there's a author I really like, and I can't remember his name. He's a comedian, but he said he doesn't believe in mantras, but he would have this mantra, and he said, everything is always working out for me. And then he said, and then go find examples. And I love that because it's not just, oh, everything's working out. It's like, oh, look, I found a parking place. Oh, look, that person was really nice and handed that to me. Oh, and so it's intentionally looking. And I think that's like the cure, is that when we are intentional, and it's almost like gratitude. Like sometimes I can take gratitude for granted. It's like, okay, these are the things I'm grateful for today. Check, check, check. Let's move on. But It's like when I'm really intentional and I feel the gratitude for whatever, instead of just checking it off, feeling it. And so if I'm looking for people and looking for the good, instead of in the back of my mind, just assuming everyone's going to be a jerk.
Yeah, exactly. And we have different types of relationships with people, but one of the things he talks about is how our relationships are what heals us. They're like the medicine. Our relationships are emotional medicine. And if our relationships are always kind of tainted by this cynicism, we're not going to get the healing, the cure from interacting. And part of that is because there's different kinds of relationships. He talks about how some relationships are transactional. You expect to get something in return for doing something, like, you go to a restaurant and have dinner and they expect you to pay for it. And so there's a relationship there. They're serving you, they're cooking for you, and you pay for it. And so that's kind of a transactional. But if we always expect our relationships to have this kind of transactional, then we're always expecting something out of a relation, out of what we do. And one of the other ways, not just looking for good in people, but one of the other ways he said to improve our attitude, our cynicism, is to do something generous, to do something good. But it matters our attitude about what we're doing. It's not just doing something because we're expected to, doing something good because that's what everyone does. And being kind of begrudging about it. I got to do this because that's what is expected.
That's the should.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But doing it out of that pure heart. And I was thinking about in the Bible where it talks about tithing and how it says, give with a heart of joy. And when I was going to coaching school, it was not a Christian coaching school. And so it surprised me that they talked about tithing, but they talked about the laws in the world, like gravity. When we give, we receive. So when we give with a joyful heart, then that's how we receive back. And that had such an impact on me because I know, there are certain religions or certain things where we're told to forgive. We've talked about forgiveness. Mm-hmm. If we forgive begrudgingly, it's not really forgiveness. Yeah. But when we do it from a heart where we're really letting go, then that changes everything.
Yeah. So this really ties in with our how you change your map, your mental map, your defaults, and how important it is. Part of what he talked about is it's often a cynical point of view is often a result of having a trauma or something happening to you. So as survivors, I know for me, I was extremely cynical. I was really down, and I look back at that time and a lot of my relationships reinforced that. And I could see how in my life when I was distrusting and how that affected my relationships and how messed up it was. And I could see how it actually kind of spread throughout my relationships and so forth, and how toxic it was. So it's really important to find, ways of curing that. And there's times that it's important to be skeptical or, be aware, or be, like for you, safety wise, it is important to be aware of your surroundings and maybe not do things at night when you're alone. And that's different. That's not necessarily cynicism. That's just survival.
Yeah. Well, and it's awareness. And we talk about that a lot. We talk about being aware. And it's one thing to be aware in a situation where we know, especially like as a woman at night, of being careful. But then there's the other thing, just in general situations where you're doing interactions and where we constantly feel like we got cheated in life. So we feel like, oh, they're cheating us. Oh, they're getting more than I'm getting. Oh, I'm giving more than I'm getting. Like it's just that very subtle thing. But when we start to look at it differently and say, oh, well, I'm giving this freely, it doesn't matter who gets more. Then that's where it starts to shift, because then we get out of survival and into thriving.
Yeah. I think for survivors, we've been taught not to trust people. We've been taught that people are selfish and dishonest.
Gonna hurt us.
And are going to hurt us. And so it takes a lot to unlearn those lessons. But it is possible, and it's also really important as far as our own relationships. And the other side to that, or the other part of that, is relationships are so important. They're the reason that we thrive, is by having healthy relationships. That's one of the things that thriving is to have healthy relationships. Yeah. And so it's really hard to do if you're not always aware of how cynical you are, but you're just not trusting people very much. If you just don't think people really, have good intentions.
or have your best interest. Not that like everyone has to have our best interest, but we think, oh, everybody is only out for themselves. And the thing about that is it leads to isolation, which leads to loneliness. And especially after COVID, we're hearing more and more people, they live less long when they're lonely. They struggle with depression, that loneliness, and that can come from being cynical, so that you start to really isolate yourself. And so again, it comes down to if this is something you want to get past, you can by being intentional and, coming up with like a daily routine. Like today I'm going to find one person that I'm going to go, wow, that person really, I have no reason to mistrust them, whatever your level is. But, and then when you go to bed, did I find one person today? And it's being intentional and starting to change that, because then our pathways of our brain can change.
Yeah. And looking for ways to be generous without feeling like it's a duty.
Yeah.
Being generous because you can and you want to. And it's funny when at first, it feels like you can't even think of a time you can do that. It will never come up, but just looking for ways to be generous, and then you'd be surprised how it starts popping up in your life. And all of a sudden, you're aware of more and more ways to interact, even if you're just interacting nicely with someone you know or may not even know. Just interacting, have that personal, friendly interaction that can really make someone feel better, and you'll feel better, and all of a sudden it becomes easier and easier. You notice it more.
Yeah. And there's that part when you were talking about not doing it begrudgingly is finding, making sure you have good boundaries. If somebody's asking you to do something that is basically, because I work with people in recovery, they might ask us to pick up their boulder and carry it. It's like we don't want to do things for people they can do for themselves, but it's finding that line, having good boundaries, but also, not doing everything for everybody. But also we've had some family issues going on, and we're all chipping in and doing more than we would usually do, but we're all doing it with great love, because we're not just trying to help someone who doesn't need help. We're helping someone who actually needs it. And so I think, again, it's that spiral of having good boundaries and then recognizing if you're doing something begrudging, stop. Yeah. Just stop and look at it. And if you're doing it begrudging because you're picking up something that's too big for you that somebody else can do themselves,
or should do themselves, that would be better for them to be doing it than you taking that load off of them.
Yeah. So find the places you can be healthfully helpful. Healthfully helpful. I like that.
Well, and he talked a lot about how this affects communities and even societies, and how societies that are trusting, that more people are trusting, how they're thriving so much more. And it has a self-perpetuating effect. If you're trusting and you trust people and you're generous and you're giving, then it snowballs. More people are trusting, more people are generous, more people are giving and doing things, and the communities thrive when that's the attitude. But also the opposite, if you're always cynical and don't trust people and think everyone else is greedy, how when that spreads, everyone suffers, everyone struggles, and it self-perpetuates because everyone assumes everyone else is untrustworthy.
And he mentioned, we're in a society now where we want to protect our children so much that we're almost teaching them to be scared of everyone and everything. And
I love what he said. If
it's a fine line.
You want them to be aware that there's dangers, but if you just overemphasize that, if that's all you're talking about, how the dangers, all the slings and arrows he called it out there that they're going to face, then they always have their shield up. He said they've always got their shield up, and that's very biblical reference. I noticed, but he didn't say it. It's from the Bible, but it is. I mean, and if they always have their shield up, they're pushing everyone else away.
Yeah.
So when you've always got that shield up because you think you've got to fight off all this danger. And that's why for survivors, this is, we're often very much putting up our shields or our walls or putting on our masks because we think everyone out there is out to get us.
Yeah. I had a coach one time that called it sinful self-protectiveness, where we're so hard trying to protect ourselves because we don't want to get hurt that we don't let good or bad in. And, it is delicate with children because why are we here? Because we were abused as children. So it is delicate, but when we can teach kids to trust their instincts and teach them to be aware, and that mostly people are good. But I remember one time I was at Costco and I was waiting for something, like they were going to put something together or get something. And there was a little kid riding on one of those those horses, bucking horses.
Oh, yeah.
And I was just getting a kick out of him. I wasn't around my grandkids, and it was about the same age, and I was just getting a kick out of watching him. His mom came over and got in my face, said, "Stop staring at my child." And I was like,
wow.
"Grandma, I look like a grandma," you know? And I walked away feeling so sad for that little kid, because his mom is making him believe everybody's safe.
Yeah,
and here I am, just a sweet grandma smiling at him, you know, but that wasn't okay even. And it is a fine line, but I think that if we stay aware and pay attention, that we can navigate that.
Yeah, and we want to teach our children what to be aware of and what you can tolerate and what isn't tolerable, what isn't good, and be aware of that, but not necessarily tell them to always look out, that there's always, you know, there's danger everywhere, you know.
Because then you raise them in fear.
Yeah, if they're in fear all the time, they're never going to form trusting relationships, because they're not going to have trust.
Right. And just on a side note, when we come from that and we don't heal it, then we put that on our children. And as a coach in counseling with women, there have been so many women that were hurt as kids, and they would say, all I wanted was for my daughter to never get hurt. And they would say to me, and then my daughter got raped. And I always felt like it was because they overprotected so much that by the time the child got in a situation, they didn't have the wherewithal. Not that they could say no and the person would stop, but they weren't exactly aware of circumstances because they were overprotected because of their parents' lack of protection, however that goes. But when that's our intention, I don't want my child to get hurt. Think how you're parenting. Rather than I want my child to be loved and safe.
Yeah. And enjoy their childhood, you know, not be constrained.
Fearful,
but be aware and know that there can be danger out there, but not necessarily expect it from everyone or every situation. Yeah, it is a fine line, and that's why it's such a good thing that we can unlearn it. It takes intention, and I think for survivors, most of us have a lot of unlearning. It's not by choice. It's just what happened, and it's what we're dealing with is unlearning a lot of it. And this is one of the things that we have to unlearn to form good.
And do it gently. Start to let somebody in. And if you get some red flags, then look at them. Talk with your counselor. See if they're real. See if you're just, you know, sabotaging. Because as we begin to, I like what the word you used that he used, hopeful skepticism. Because the difference between cynic and skepticism is looking for an answer. To something, where cynicism is just pure not trusting anyone ever. So they're really different.
So, and there's a hope that things will be better, and skepticism that, you know, you want to find out how and what you know, means to get better. And also being not assuming, you know, paying attention to what you always assume and try to counter those assumptions when they're not necessarily correct or reasonable. So,
It's so good.
Made me very aware that, I'm still very cynical at times, and there's not necessarily a good reason for it a lot of the time.
I think we can safely call ourselves recovering cynics.
Cynics, yes, I think so. And I also realized that how far I've come, and what he talked about as far as how to change our attitude and change our cynicism is how it worked for me. Finding the good in people and learning to trust them and learning to let them in, that's how it changed. And these relationships are how we grow. And that's and part of this big deal for me was realizing that, our relationships, our connectedness to people and having trusting bonds with people is what really matters in growing.
You know, an example that came to mind after I listened to this podcast was, so I do not think all men are terrible because I was abused, because I had bad marriage. I do not think I think that. But when it comes to dating, I haven't dated in years. And I think part of that is because I think anyone that would date me would hurt me. meaning they would break my heart. And so I've used that in a way to protect myself, but it's also not healthy.
Yeah.
And, and I would like to think I'm not like that. Like people go through divorce, go, I hate all men. That's a really bad thing to say to yourself, because there are so many good men, but there's something in me from my past that says when a guy might be interested in me that, oh, he's just going to break my heart. And so I've had to just pay attention and go, I didn't even know I was thinking that way. And it's so silly, but it's those things that we do. It's the protection, right? Because we're taught our survival, our amygdala. But then when we start to recognize, so when, listening to podcasts, as we recognize and we begin to heal, then we can begin to open up and have more people in our life, and have also, we don't trust everyone, but we learn that we can trust people. And it's just kind of a, oh my gosh, I didn't even know that I was putting up walls and barriers and fences everywhere, any kind I could, to keep myself safe. And that's so childish. And even in the Bible, it says, when I was a child, I behaved as a child. But now that I'm an adult, I throw those things off. But unless somebody brings it to our attention, how do we know we're behaving as a child in those protective ways that are not helpful?
Yeah, I think this podcast, the title of it, I was thinking, oh, this would be good for others to hear before I listen to the podcast. For all those people who are cynical and negative, and they need to listen to this. So this is probably a really good message for them. And then I realized, no, this is actually really important for me. And I could see how it does affect me, and also how it used to affect me, and why it's so important that did change in my life, how that affected my life in such a positive way, and how it was so toxic back then. And even though I realized it was toxic, it still lingers. There's still cynicism that lingers that I didn't think, I needed to pay attention to, because I don't think I'm that way at all. I'm a very positive person most of the time.
There was this lady I knew, and I thought she would always say, I'm the most, not me, but her, she would say about herself, I'm the most positive person I know. And she was so cynical. And I would always laugh. And people didn't know her. I go, well, she's really positive. And we'd all laugh. And then I had to look at myself, and I'm like, I always think, oh, I'm so positive. But actually, deep down, I'm cynical. And I think I've had some levels of recovery, but it's like I always want to learn more, go deeper. I want to be a lifelong learner. I want to grow until I die.
Makes you pay attention to what you assume you know or think you know about people. And is that really true? I mean, are they really that way? Or are you just assuming this about these people? And there are definitely times my assumption of what my first impression of people, I assume something about them, and it's not necessarily true. It's not necessarily accurate. It's actually not even close.
Yeah.
And so why do I assume that? What is it in me that's making me think these are not good people?
That's a good question. I want to live in that question.
Well, and turning it around and looking for the good and assuming the good, and trying to find the good,
and being kind, doing something kind. Yeah.
Just spontaneously. It sounds so cliche in a way, but it works. And I know it works because I could see how it's changed my life and my connections, my relationships.
Well, and we hear all the time from the neuroscientists that we can change our brain by thinking, but what it takes is thinking and action. So we can't just think, oh, okay, I'm going to trust people. Now we've got to actually put ourselves out there in ways with safe people and go, oh, look, I can trust people. We don't have to be ridiculous and trust everyone, but there are safe people and good people around us that we don't even know that we know.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily a call to be naive and just be completely unjudgmental of everyone.
Right.
You have to
put your hand
be
in
aware. You have to be aware.
Right.
but it's a good thing to take a look at our assumptions and try to understand them better and see if we're being reasonable, see if they are accurate or there's a reason behind them.
Mm-hmm. I remember there was a person that when my kids were little made me very uncomfortable, and I didn't really see him do anything, but he did look like somebody I knew that had abused me. He had a very similar look. And so I decided that I would keep my guard up, but I didn't really have any proof or any reason to not like this person. We were in kind of a group together. And so I didn't leave my kids ever alone with him. There was never any reason for that. It was just, a group of people that did some things together. But then later in life, his daughter came out and said that he had abused her. And I thought, oh my gosh, I didn't protect my kids, but I actually did, because even though I didn't have any proof or reason, I said, I don't know how I feel about this, but I feel something. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, but I'm going to keep my kids safe. And if I hear anything, but I made sure there was never any reason for them to be really around him or alone with him. And so I don't know if that's a good example of it, but but if I knew that they were an abuser, then of course I wouldn't even be in a group that they were in. But I didn't know if I was making that up because of my experience. So I had to make the call based on what I knew and what I'd seen. And I hadn't seen any weird behavior. I just had a weird vibe. Like I didn't witness him being inappropriate. So I really didn't have any ground to stand on. So what do you think about that?
Well, that's part of not just being naive. And I think there are times when our gut feeling about someone, there's a reason for it. And we might not be completely aware of it at first, but I think
was I getting triggered because he looked similar, or was it an intuition?
Yeah. And I think intuitions are pretty good most of the time. But when you're tainted by just a constant cynicism, so I think it's important to balance that. And so how do you, as a survivor, that's tough because we are kind of on guard and we do think, we've seen more and are more aware of than someone who isn't a survivor, than someone who hasn't been through trauma. So we are a little more aware, but how do we balance that? How do we not be so hyper vigilant, so hyper cynical? And that's the
$64,000 question.
Yeah. The $1 million answer. How do you balance that?
Yeah, it's awareness.
And I think it is awareness. Is important, and awareness not only of what the situation we're in, but awareness of how we feel about it, what our assumptions are, and where they're coming from.
So much to deal with as a survivor, but isn't it great when we can when we can look at something and go, this would be good for people in our situation, and then we're like, oh no, actually it's good for me.
Actually, I'm pretty sure I need to pay attention to this. Yep, it's funny. But, and boy, doing this has given me a lot of those, oh yeah, moments. And so I think just this process, just being in the process and realizing you're in the process that it's going to be continual growth. But I like that, there's hope because we know that things do get better. We know that we can change and grow and develop in better habits, better awareness, have better feelings and so forth. So that's the hopeful part.
Yeah, that's a glorious thing.
Yeah.
Well, this has been such a great conversation, and I really like the hopeful skepticism about cynicism, and then I love the part about doing a kindness or an action to kind of get out of yourself and realizing like helping people when they need it is a kind of good thing, and you can see them smile or respond, and you can be like, oh look, they're not scary. I don't know.
There's ways. There are good people out there.
Lots of them.
There are people that are worth investing in time or friendship or just, a smile or congratulation or, support when they need it. And there's a lot of reasons that our connectedness to others really helps us grow.
Definitely. And that's why we do this podcast. So people don't feel alone.
That's true.
Yeah.
So that's it for today.
We are going to have a prayer time if you want to stick with us. If not, we believe in you.
We want to hear from you. We want to hear your stories.
If you like this podcast, please rate and review. because that's how other people can find us. And we really want to spread this message.
Father, I thank you for your connection to our lives and your desire to be connected to us and your desire to heal our lives and to heal our hurts, our traumas. Lord, I just pray that for anyone listening, they would have a desire to connect with you, but they would also feel your presence, that they would recognize that you do want to have a connection with them. You do want to have a relationship with them, and that you want that just the way they are right now. They don't have to do anything. They don't have to change anything. They don't have to earn your grace and love in their lives. They've got it. They just have to look for it, and you want to be there in their lives. Lord, I just pray that they would feel that, and they would feel the grace and mercy of your love in their lives and want to share that with others, that they would be looking for the good in others and want to spread that hope with others. And I just pray that they would feel connected to others that are also hopeful. In your name I pray.
Father, thank you for survivors, that we survived. And I thank you that as we learn more, that we can open our lives up more. And Lord, isn't it wonderful that we can go from not trusting anyone to beginning to trust, and that, things that we've said, I know I've said I'm just that way, that we don't have to be that way, that we can grow, we can learn, we can have hope and joy, and that we don't have to be cynical. And Lord, just the recognition that of maybe I am cynical has been such an eye-opener to me. And I pray that in my life, you will help me to learn how to find those safe people, and then knowing they're safe, find ways to trust them, because there's no reason not to. And as there's no reason to trust people, there's also no reason to not trust them. So I pray that you'll help us to really have fun with this, learning to open up, drop down some of those walls, and, maybe turn a wall into a fence. I don't know how it goes, maybe bit by bit, but thank you that we can have that hopeful skepticism, and that we can heal, and that we don't have to be isolated and alone. I thank you that you are a good God, and that you want us to heal, and you want us to be in community, and you want us to be in your community. In your Son's holy name, amen.
Amen.